Sean has made immediate impacts on a lot of people in that very first year at Wisconsin, and his success at Xavier in Arizona has not been a surprise to any of us who were around him then, that's for sure.
This is the Sean Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing. Now, here's your hosts, Paul Fritchner and Adam Baum, with the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Sean Miller.
Welcome into another episode of the Sean Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing, as well as the official payroll sponsor of the Sean Miller Podcast, Payroll Partners. I'm Paul Fritchner alongside Adam Baum, and the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers. And today, we're joined by a special guest, Stan Van Gundy. Stan, it's great to see you. Great to have you on the show today. Of course, a long and storied history in the game of basketball. You've been an assistant coach, a head coach at the Division I level, at the NBA level. Come from a storied history of basketball in your family as well. Your brother Jeff, the rest of your family. It's really fun to have you here on the Sean Miller Podcast today and reunite you two, because I know the both of you go back a long way. You were on staff together at Wisconsin back in the early 90s, and now here you are together on Stan, the Sean Miller Podcast. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's outstanding. I mean, I was on once with Sean when he and Archie were doing it, and you know, Sean and I have known each other for a long time, and we come from similar backgrounds, you know, fathers who were coaches. We got brothers who coach, you know, so really similar backgrounds.
Stan, I'm going to start off with a great topic that I hope brings a smile to your face. But one of the guests I've had on this podcast is Stanley Johnson. And you've coached Stanley, and I've coached Stanley, and we know him and love him. And he's shared with us that you've stayed in contact with him, which doesn't surprise me, but I think it says a lot about how you approach coaching with your former players and, you know, guys that you've been around for the last, 20, 30, 40 years now, But Stanley, as you know, he's at the crossroads. And when we talked to him, he was getting ready to go to Europe for the first time, which is, even better than me. When you've been drafted high, you've played in the NBA, been on multiple teams, and then you make that decision to go to Europe. That's not the easy decision. That's not the one that I think he wanted to sign up for maybe a decade ago, but I do think that he has a long life still in front of him. So I asked him this one question. I said, Stanley, with all that you've been through, a lot of good too, and now that you've been in the NBA and experienced what you've experienced, if you had advice or a conversation with your younger self, right, what you know today, what would you tell your younger self, or somebody who's 18 years old, who's about ready to go down that path that you've already been down? What would you say? And he thought about it for a second, and he said, I would give myself the same advice that Stan Van Gundy gave me when I went to Detroit. And when he said it, I was like, all ears. I can't wait to hear what this advice was, because pretty big question for a young guy, right? So what he said is that you brought him in. This would be after he was at Detroit, probably when you first picked him, let's call it the summer before he ever played an NBA game. And you said, Stanley, look, you got family, you got faith, you got a lot of things that are going to be important to you. And I don't want to underestimate any of those things. But here's the advice I'm going to give you now. Unless you make basketball your first priority from this point on, and everything that you make a decision to do, you're never going to reach your potential. And you'll be surprised that even though you're a high pick, how the NBA will be a difficult place for you to stay and achieve and do things that you think you're going to do now, but you have no idea how difficult this is going to be. And it's like that for everybody, even a high pick like yourself. And he said, for example, where you choose to live, you're going to choose it first point, basketball in mind. If you add somebody to your circle, friend, family, girlfriend, how does that affect basketball, the job, right? What you decide to eat or put in your body, you have to do so. And it may sound weird, but with basketball in mind, how does this impact what you're doing on the court? If you do that, a lot of great things are going to happen. But if you don't do that, your path's going to be a lot more difficult. And what Stanley said is he didn't listen. He didn't realize it early as a pro. And I think without him going deeper into it, cost him years cost him the opportunity. His point was, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I guess I would just start with, do you remember having that conversation with him or a version of it?
Well, I remember because I have that conversation or a version of it with everybody when we draft them and bring them in, because look, your whole life and what you're able to do with your for your family and for everyone around you, and what you're able to do for yourself and other interests you have and everything else is going to revolve around how well your career goes and how well you're able to support all those people. When I worked for Pat Riley, I mean, his big saying was, keep the main thing the main thing. And I mean, and that's so simple, but it's so true. And you can have all these other interests. And certainly at 19 years old, when Stanley came into the league, and you've got all this money and people, you can enjoy it and have fun, but you've got to understand you're only going to have that life if the main thing is taken care of,
Right.
And I think guys get so hung up, a lot of young guys in our league get so caught up in the lifestyle and the things around the game that the game gives you that they forget that the game's the main thing.
Right. No question about it. I will say though, to hear him just be able to, and these two guys are my witness. As soon as the question was asked, he went right to it. So I think it's advice that in his world and that young player, whether you do really well or don't, those initial conversations, it shows you how powerful they really can be.
But you also know, and we know this too, Sean, you and I both as parents too, like you can only pass along the advice. For the most part, young people are going to have to learn the lessons on their own. And sometimes they're really hard lessons. And for Stanley, who's a great person, I was going to say great kid, but he's not a kid anymore.
Yeah.
Great person, great competitor, should have had a better career in the NBA. They can be really hard lessons, but unfortunately, that's just what life is, man. I mean, we all learn things on our own, and Stanley's not the first guy who at 19 thought he had all the answers and knew better than coaches or anything else. We all did. I mean, I remember I tell myself, like, one of the things that everybody needs, I don't care how old you are, right? Everybody needs someone around them who will tell them the truth. And you and I, like, growing up with coaches as fathers, it's such a benefit because.
No, I got the truth. I definitely got the truth.
I tell you the truth. I'll never forget. I was 24 years old. I was a head coach for the first time. I was at the Division III level. I had a great team. And it wasn't because of what I was doing. My wife could have won. I was 26-2 that year. My wife would have gone 24-4. I mean, the talent was great. But I remember, so it's my first year as a head coach. I'm on with my dad. He's still coaching. And I'm probably going on and on about all these things, about everything I know and how great I am. And, just do this and do this. And he said to me, and it has stuck with me my entire life, he said, Stan, when you think you've got all the answers, it's only because you don't know all the questions. And that is so true. You think you got it all figured out, and then you run up against another great coach or another great player and go, oh shit, I have no idea how to stop this dude. Like, you didn't know the questions. And so you thought you had it all figured out. And that's where Stanley was at the time. And now, because he's as you know, he's a smart guy. And now he's been humbled. And so now he can offer great perspective on the world. And what my hope is he'll go over to Turkey, play great, gain some confidence back. People will see him and he'll get another shot.
Me too. That's it too. I think he's wired to be able to accomplish that because of what you just said. No doubt. And you forget how we talked about him. He's no longer a kid, but like he's still so young because he entered the league, to your point, as like the 19-year-old, one of the youngest, I believe, even in his draft. So, 10 years later, he's not even 30 years old, or he just turns 30 years old now, Yeah.
Well, and this summer or this spring, when JJ Redick and LeBron James were doing that podcast, at one point they asked LeBron, about the toughest defenders he's had to face. And the first name out of his mouth was Stanley Johnson.
Yeah.
Stanley's rookie year in the playoffs. And you hear that. I remember that series, and you hear that, and then it's hard to put that together with the guy being out of the league. I mean, here's the leading scorer of all time saying that's the guy that was the toughest on me, and he can't find a spot in the league now, and it's crazy.
Yeah. So Stan, I talked to Brad Stevens this spring, and I think everybody, you say the word Brad Stevens now, he's so revered because of what he's done, both coaching in the NBA, coaching in college, and now in his new role with the Celtics. He's obviously an incredibly smart guy. I mean, almost like generationally. I mean, you look at him and you just say, boy, he has a lot of things figured out. And I go back to, I remember who Brad was even when he was an assistant coach at Butler, or when he first became a coach at Butler. If you really think back to then, and I think you even maybe have broadcast a couple of his games. I don't know if timing wise, if I got that right or not, but your path might have crossed with him in different ways when he was that person too, right? Before he's the Brad Stevens that the rest of the world knows. But one of the things I think he always had a keen eye for was what self-awareness means in sports, especially at the highest level. So I'm talking to him this spring, and he was talking about, making the right picks and looking at the NBA draft, and maybe even how they built their team in Boston, or some things that he's really learned or continues to value more. And he said to me, he said, in the world of today, when it's social media, name, image, and likeness now at the college level, think about, Stan, players can transfer multiple times, be it 3 schools, and not sit out, be able to go from school A to B to C in 3 years, right? They have more choices now than ever before. So I think it's even more difficult to determine who you really are in life in the sport you play in. Because if things don't work, you can change your lie in a snap of a finger, right? The kind of having to stay with it just simply because of how the rules used to be or circumstances. I go back to when I played in college before I ever became a coach. If you were going to leave school A to go to school B, man, you had to look at that 1 year and say, this next year, I can't do anything. I have to practice every day. Nobody's going to know who I am. I got to do all that only to return to the place that I could just stay right here and fight it out, So I would ask you this, from your perspective, and it's so unique the perspective you have, calling college basketball now, your pedigree in the NBA, self-awareness, has that become almost as important as a guy's ability to make threes and do different things? When you think about drafting players or watching young players be successful, knowing who they are and what makes them good, I think is more important now than ever before, or determining that.
Well, it's a great talent, character trait, however you want to have it. And it's absolutely necessary. Look, there's the top 25, 30 players in the world. They don't have to worry about any of that. Wherever they go, they're going to be great. If you're Luka Doncic or, some of these guys at the top of the game, LeBron James, certainly Steph Curry, it doesn't matter. Go anywhere, you know what your role is going to be. You're the guy. I mean, but for the rest of the world, you've got to find your niche. And that starts with, do you know who you are? And I've seen some guys and coached some guys who probably should not have achieved to the level that they achieved to, but they knew exactly who they were. I'm an old guy, so I'm going back, but I had Keith Bogans in Orlando, and I'm telling you, I remember my first day in the gym. It was in the summer, and a bunch of guys had come in to work out, and I only had Steve Clifford there. So I'm the head coach, my second day in the office, but I'm going to work guys out. And I'd spent the previous year working with sixth graders with my son. And so now I start Keith Bogans, who's an NBA two guard. I start him with the same ball handling drills sixth graders had been doing all year. Couldn't do them at all. Dude could not dribble 6'5" guard. I'm telling you, if he had to take a second dribble with either hand, like guys on the bench would be like, whoa, like they didn't, because he would lose the ball. Couldn't dribble at all. Couldn't barely pass except for easy stuff. He could defend, rebound, and shoot the three. And that's all he did. That's all he did. If somebody threw him the ball, a big guy, and started to come to pick and roll, he'd wave the guy off. Like, no, that's not what I do. And because of that, this guy built a hell of an NBA career. Whereas other guys also can't do those things. The difference is they try to.
They are auditioning. Yeah.
Yes,
No, right.
and they don't. I think one of the things, one of the big words in the NBA now, which I laugh about all the time, it's been for years now. Oh, player development. We've got a great player development program. Player development's been going on since basketball was invented, for God's sakes. I mean, that is coaching. If you don't develop players, your team won't be any good. You can't win. Our fathers were doing player development back in 40, 50 years ago. Like, come on with the player development. But I think that one of the big mistakes we make in player development is everybody thinks player development is expanding everybody's game. And I think that's true if you have stars, like a guy who can do everything. But I think for most guys, you want to really develop as a player. You figure out what your greatness is. And as we develop them, we narrow their game.
Right.
We do these things and be great at them, and stay away from these things that are your weaknesses. Those are the great players in the league. I was just talking to my brother yesterday, and they were getting ready to play. They're getting ready to play Dallas. And we were talking about Dallas's centers, Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, right? And, those guys, Jason Kidd's done a great job with them, and they're both outstanding players. And they do four things, and they're the 4 R's. They run, they roll, they reject, and they rebound. Yeah. And they don't try to do anything else. Now, Derek Lively can really pass too, but that's it. They're not trying to shoot jumpers. They're not putting the ball between their legs and trying to be guards. They do 4 things. They are great at them. That team went to the NBA Finals. Now, they're not the best players, but they're big reasons that they went to the finals. If they ran into a player development guy that's going to try to make them into a jump shooter, they're going to get worse as players, not better.
Yeah. Stan, there's 2 guys. You coached one of them, and I think got to be one of your favorite years as a coach is when you coached the Miami Heat and Brian Grant was on your team. And Brian Grant, I think
your musketeer, baby.
You played him at center for a lot, right? I mean, he would have been your center.
Our starting center, yeah.
And that was before the NBA to some degree downsized. Today, not that guys are short, trust me, but, where there's more skill on the floor, more shooting on the floor than ever before. So it looks a little different than maybe it did a long time ago. That was in the era still where size was so validated. I remember people looking and saying, wait, the Heat are playing in the playoffs. You're playing against a really good Pacer team, and Brian Grant was your starting center. But Brian Grant's numbers retired here in him, and then also James Posey. I think you have 2 great examples of guys who had amazing self-awareness. It was almost like you value their game, and they can do this, and they really know who they are.
Well, that's exactly right on both cases, And look, with Brian Grant, it was great rebounding, physical play, and make the mid-range jump shot at the time when we still shot mid-range jump shots in the NBA. And he went out and he did it every night. And Brian Grant wasn't trying to make multiple dribbles or do any of that. And he came in and worked on those things every single day. James Posey knew that, how he was going to get paid and find a place in the league was his defense, running the floor, and then as he got more into the league, shooting the three. That was it. Yeah. Those guys, because they knew who they were and they could do things at a high level, they found a way. Now, college and the NBA are a little bit different. I know there's a little bit of difference in that a lot of college guys, like I go back to a Danny Ferry, a Christian Laettner at Duke, sort of guys who were good all-around players, could do a lot of different things, but maybe didn't have that one, defined thing that they were great at. Those guys can be really good college players, but the NBA guys, other than the top 10 or 15 guys, the guys who really make it are guys that as soon as you say their name, you can point to the 2 or 3 things that they do really well. And they just don't do a lot of other stuff, and I've had so many of those guys over the year. And we never presented it as a coach as a negative. I never told guys like, hey, don't dribble the ball. Hey, don't shoot the ball. Our thing was always with players, play to your greatness. Like, if you say, well, coach, I can shoot. Well, everybody can shoot. What are you talking about? Like, of course. So you shoot 32% from 3. Yeah, you can shoot. Okay. But that's not your greatness. You can't make a name for yourself. You can't help our team win. You can't do any of that shooting the ball, especially if you're going to shoot it a lot at 32%. You got to play to your great. What do you do great? What do you do that people have to take away? Those are the things you've got to go to. And I think there's some guys in the league, a guy that played up the road from you guys at Ohio State, Mike Conley's made a tremendous career, out of playing defense, running the team. And, he perfected that floater in the lane because Mike wasn't going to go, especially not as he got on in his career, and dunk on people. So he had to have that shot. I mean, as soon as I see Mike Conley, I see he's left-handed, I see that right-handed floater going up. Like, your game is defined, and I don't think enough guys understand that. Too many guys want to do things that aren't their strengths, and if they would stick to their strengths, they could be really, really good players.
That's one of the things that I'm trying, and as you know, it's in college. I think for all of us that coach in college, there's that fine line, right, of adding to a guy's development, giving him things that he currently doesn't have when they show up here, making his weaknesses better, less of a weakness, or making a strength taking a shot from good and all of a sudden great. And I think all of us feel really good about it, but also allowing them to understand that at that next level, to your point, you have to be able to bring the number one thing to the table, and that is you have to know who you are. I mean, look, everybody likes to talk about TJ McConnell.
Well, I was just going to bring him up. That's the dude, right? It's the NBA now. Like, you're supposedly you can't be a good player, especially a guard, if you're not shooting a lot of threes, right? I don't know, man. That dude every night, and you can't keep him out of the paint. He plays with incredible pace. Defensively, he's going to get after you every second he's on the floor, and he's going to make a high percentage of the shots that everybody says are not the great shots to take anymore. Like, because you can't just, like, here's my only argument. I love the analytics, but my only argument is you have to fit the analytics to the player. Right. So it's great to say, well, we got to shoot more threes. Well, fine, but that's not TJ McConnell's game. Can you imagine if TJ McConnell had spent all these years at Duquesne in Arizona and then in the NBA, and he spent all day out there just shooting threes? Like, he's going to come in the gym every day and get up 500 threes, 1,000 threes, he probably would have become a better three-point shooter, okay? And he would have never played in the NBA. Never.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah, I'm going to send you a couple clips. He was just recently on here, this podcast, and I'm telling you, you talk about self-awareness. I went down that path with him. These two guys heard, and he came up with the slogan. I didn't give it to him. He said, Coach, look, the number one thing for me is I have to know what my superpower is. And he said, so many guys that I've seen as teammates and I've run into in the NBA, they have these workout coaches or they go home in the summer and he used the term like they add to their bag, right? They're adding to their bag, but it's things that are not tangible to what they're going to do in a real game and play. And he said, one of the things that I believe that I have the answer for that I've mastered is my superpower. And this is what he said his superpower was, Stan, is my motor. And he said, so with that, there's never going to be a day that I don't take care of my body. I'm going to run more. I'm going to train different. I'm going to hire a chef because I cannot lose my superpower or else I can't play in the NBA. But what my superpower allows me to do is pick up full court and be different than a lot of other players. So it's that difference that allows me to have a chance. And he goes, and in terms of working on my game, he said, I can set a cone up at Chartiers Valley High School in Pittsburgh and try to just do the best I can, that if you go under the screen, I keep you honest, but I'm going to work on the things that I'm going to do in the game. And he said, if you ask me, how have I played in the NBA for 10 years, I'll tell you that I feel like I know who I am, and that's really helped me.
No, look, I watch these guys, every time I broadcast a game now, I get there early. I go out on the court and I watch these guys work out early with coaches. And, everybody's got a million player development coaches now. And these guys, they do a great job and everything. But sometimes I'm looking at guys, not sometimes, the majority of these guys who aren't playing in the rotation that I'm watching work out and the things they're working on. And I'm like, that's not going to get you in the rotation. That's not what's going to get you in the rotation. Like they're working on, they'll go like spin dribble to a step back. And I'm like, you know what I'm going to do if you go to that move in a game? I'm taking you out. That's what I'm going to do. I'm taking you out. Like what you need to be able to do is make the spot up jumper, do a straight line drive against a closeout, and if help comes, put the ball on target to the next guy. That's what I need you to do. And then defend, block out, and rebound. So if I'm the player development coach and I really want to help the guy get on the court, that's the shit I got to be doing. Like listen, there's not very many guys that are going to go from the 13th guy not in the rotation to being the primary scorer on a team. They're just not. Like, you might go from the 7th or 8th guy as a rookie to being the primary scorer. If you're not in a rotation, that's where you got to get to. Be a rotation player, maybe a 5th starter. Like, that's the stuff you got to be working on. So you're out there, these guys are out there doing all this shit. I'm looking sometimes going, you got to be kidding me. Like, what are we doing here with these guys? Like I'm watching a team last year and, big thing now is on the high pick and roll. You hit that big on the short roll and teams rotate. He's got to be able to make the next pass.
Right.
And they're working with this guy, young guy, and they're making the short roll pass. And they won him taking the ball in the dribble, and off the dribble, they didn't even have him put the other hand on the ball. A center now, one hand pass to the weak side corner. Well, he's doing a drill with no defense, and over half the passes are turnovers. And I'm like, you're teaching this guy to turn the ball over. Like, why don't we catch the short roll pass, take a dribble, jump stop, two hands, and put it on target? Like, it might be a little slower. Maybe the guy doesn't get the shot off, but at least we still got the damn ball.
Yeah, no question. No question.
The Sean Miller Podcast is proud to partner with Deer Park Roofing, a company that's provided elite service for homes and businesses since 1996 and leads the industry in professionalism, quality, and responsiveness. Whether your needs are residential or commercial, like the outstanding work on the Cintas Center, the home of Xavier basketball, Deer Park can handle any job and ensure it's done right. Deer Park's motto is protect what's important, and what's important to you is important to Deer Park Roofing. Visit deerparkroofing.com. The Sean Miller Podcast is proud to partner with Payroll Partners, where you're not just a number. That means providing a best-in-class HR and payroll experience that was built on award-winning technology and live support customer service with a dedicated payroll specialist who's just a phone call away. You shouldn't have to choose between technology and customer service. At Payroll Partners, you get both. Payroll Partners is locally owned and operated by a proud Xavier alum. Visit payrollpartners.net. That's payrollpartners.net.
Hey, Stan, changing direction. You and I spoke this spring after you, and I think you love, I don't want to speak for you, but your broadcasting has taken you to a lot of different levels and games, big moments. But watching you call an NCAA tournament it's fun for me because obviously I'm your friend. I know who you are. It seems like there's nothing you enjoy more if you're going to call a game than to really get into the NCAA tournament and call those games. Am I right? The enjoyment that you experience?
It's incredible. Here's the thing. You only get that level of excitement in the NBA in a game 7. That's it. Mm-hmm. It's the one and done nature of the NCAA tournament, and every game is so exciting.
Yeah.
There's the teams who maybe at the lower Division I level who are just excited as hell to be there.
Right.
Years and years, they finally get an opportunity. And then there's the teams who really have a chance. There's guys playing in their first tournament.
Yeah.
I mean, the fans are incredible. They travel.
Yeah.
It's just, there's nothing like it. I mean, to me, there is nothing like it in the game, and the atmosphere's outstanding. You realize, I don't even know if the players realize that at the time you do as a player and as a coach, but the players, they're going to remember those games their entire lives. They're going to remember those games. And I remember doing my first tournament game I ever did 2 years ago. We had Furman against Virginia.
Yeah.
And so the day before, Furman's coming out to practice. And
by the way, we have Marcus Foster. You got a great memory, but Marcus would have been a key player on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I remember they came out on the court to practice the day before the game. And they're the only team that did this. But Bob Ritchie let them come out with cameras and stuff. And they're taking pictures of each other in the arena. And then after 5 minutes, they put it away and they got to work. And he got questioned about that. Are you guys here to win or to enjoy it? And he said, yes. We have this great accomplishment. We're here. I'm not going to tell the players not to enjoy it. We can do that and still be here to win and get down to business. And sure enough, the next day they get an incredible win over Virginia.
Right.
But I just thought it was such a great perspective because Bob Ritchie knew these kids are going to remember this for the rest of their lives. And he wasn't going to take that away from them, in the moment. And you can't take 5 minutes to enjoy it,
we talked, if you remember this conversation, Illinois was getting ready to play UConn, and I believe you had the game this year, right?
Yeah.
So, and where was that, in Boston?
It was in Boston, yeah.
Okay, so UConn against Illinois, and you had very familiar with both teams. And I don't know if you remember this, and you were kind of talking to me, and we were talking about obviously more UConn because I obviously was very familiar with UConn. And I said to you, Stan, I'm telling you, I think they're unbeatable. And again, we had lost by about 70 points earlier in the year to them. We just finished playing them. We we were walking. We played them in a Big East tournament a couple weeks earlier than the game you called, Stan, and we were down 1 at the half. And I remember, my staff kind of going and you kind of looking at each other, and it's like, well, at least we're not going to lose by 30 this time or 40 this time. And I remember shaking my head and saying, I think we're safe in that, but I don't know. Sure enough, I'm telling you, I think they and that's what they started to do. They were putting like a 20-point spread on you in the second half alone, But I said to you, I'm telling you, the balance of offense, the intricacy of offense, pace, the execution, the talent, the players, how they do it, and then the hard play defensively, rebounding, that in my time, I haven't seen a better team in college than that UConn Husky team a year ago.
Well, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think and we had them, I had them in the 2 Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games a year before also. And yeah, look, the thing I think they had is, it starts with talent.
Yep.
Like, let's face it, people want to talk about a lot of other stuff, but they're the most talented team in the country. But on top of that, they had a lot of guys, in my opinion, that were certainly capable of being number one guys and being stars, but nobody was fighting to be that guy.
That's right.
They just, they go out like they're a tough team because they're all really good players, but you can't just focus on taking out 1 or 2 guys with them. That won't get it done. They'll just go other places, and they play really hard. And, they have the benefit, look, a lot of teams do, but they have the benefit of having played in a great league like the Big East, and not only great teams, great coaches that they have to play against, but great atmospheres. So they've been up against it a lot of times, and they've had those challenges, and those challenges have toughened them and everything else. Now, this year will be a little bit of a different story. I still think they'll be good, but they're not going to have the continuity of guys having been there. It's going to be a little bit of a different story, but you know how it goes. You guys have a lot of it at Xavier. Tradition helps, because people are used to winning and people know what it takes to win, and it gets passed down. It helps.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Well, look, you guys have heard a lot. You have anything?
This is great. Yeah.
Yeah, we could have gone another hour just listening to you guys going back and forth. Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, Stan, it's a pleasure to finally get to talk to you and meet you a little bit. But I got to say, after hearing you talk, I feel like I know Sean a lot better, because you guys say a lot of the same stuff. I feel like I have a better understanding of Sean Miller after hearing you on this podcast. But are you aware a couple things? Number one, I think you're Sean's most requested guest to get on this podcast. I think he's wanted you more than anyone else. And number two, we hear your name every day that Xavier practices. Now, what I'm curious about is the Van Gundy drill, is that a universal drill that everyone does?
You know what it is,
that's very popular?
Do you know what the Van Gundy ball screen drill? Would you say you would know what that is?
No, I would not.
Oh, this is good. All right, Sean.
No, I would not. I mean, I'm sure it's one that I ran. I was just at a clinic in Houston a few years ago speaking, and the assistant from Rice brought a drill out that was the Van Gundy drill. So I don't know, like, we all name stuff after people we stole from. So, you know, it could be anything, Well,
it's a staple. So it's the ball screen drill. It's the staple that you guys would have done a long, long time ago. Maybe you might even say to me, it's Pat Riley's drill or wherever. But, it would be like you being able to go, my team that I'm coaching is on defense. You could use the scout team, walk-ons, or coaches on offense. It's all defense, okay? And you're going through, this is horns, right? So you're going to go through horns, ball screen. Then you're going to get to the single side. This is how we play the coverage on the single side. And we're going to get to a third side. So it's like coverage.
Yeah.
And then you get through it, and you can add the recovery of, then you have to finish it off with the stop, right? So once you get through it. So did you, in fact, close out with high hands? Did you pressure the ball?
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk like, did you, the two guys in the coverage, were you where you're supposed to be? Did you do your job? The three guys are in protection, et cetera. So that's a staple around here. It's on every practice plan. In my case, I'm going to say 20 years deep. I may have 20. Man, there's probably about 2,000 practice plans out there with the Van Gundy ball screen drill. It's the thing we come the closest to doing every day.
Yeah, I stole that. I mean, I got that from Pat when I was an assistant. Pat Riley. We would do that in training camp, and then so we'd go 3 in training camp. It got crazy because you'd go through 3 pick and rolls like that. Then it would be live on the 3rd one, and then you would transition to the other end and transition back. And so, like, it ends up you're out there for a minute and a half in the drill, and then the next group's on, and you just keep going. And it was a conditioner, like, unbelievable. And I remember we had a guy, really good player from Serbia, who's now actually the president of the Serbian Basketball Federation, Sasa Danilovic. In his first training camp with us, he comes over to the sideline to Bob McAdoo and says, "I love basketball. Nobody loves this shit."
True.
And it was absolutely true. Like, guys were just worn out. But I'll tell you what, like, defense is all about multiple efforts. Like, anybody, the worst team in the league, the worst player on your team can make one play, one effort. But if you think about the game, it's all multiple things. Can I help and recover? Can I go to the offensive board and get back? Right. Can I block out and go get the ball? Like, if I can only do one thing, can I be in the lane to help and close? Can I close and contain the ball? Like, if I'm a one-play guy, I'm useless. And if you're a one-play team, unless somebody comes in and just plays awful, impatient basketball, you have no chance to stop them. So it's all about multiple efforts and drills like that. Yeah. As much as the techniques themselves, that's what you're training is. I've got to go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. Right. And I've got to be able to, one of the other things, that's really underrated, we talked about, guys knowing who they are, but I think one of the most underrated things in the game, Sean, and players, is guys who can concentrate for long periods of time. Like, I'll hear people say all the time, "Oh, he's a really good player, but he loses focus." And I'll say, "Well, then he's not a really good player." Like, you can't tell me that. You can't tell me that. I mean, that'll get it done. Like, he might put up numbers, but he's not a really good player. You're not going to win with guys like that. Like, the ability to concentrate, focus for 40 minutes, play after play after play after play, set your screen, roll to the basket, get back on, like, those are the guys you win games with.
You're exactly right. And going back to that drill, Adam, that's exactly what it is. It allows your team to understand the importance of what he just said. Multiple efforts. Defense isn't about just guarding your man or just guarding one side. You have to be able to go from one side to the next side to the third side and then finish the possession, and then that drill. And by the way, that drill is also in the category of, that's not the fun stuff that they sign up for to practice, but that is definitely, to me, the fundamentals of building defense. Look,
Matt, what I would always say to teams when they would want to talk about fun, I said, you know what? The fun is on game night when you're kicking somebody's ass. That's where the fun comes in. And this is what you got to do to get to that point. That's where the fun is.
So one of the greatest things that happened to me in my lifetime is when you first get a job or you enter an industry, who you're surrounded by will dictate your direction in such a big way. I think that's true in life. If you go into banking and you think back to your first job, that first year or two, it shapes you so many things because you don't know any better. So you're putting it all together through the eyes of what you see with the people around you. I was very fortunate. Stan will tell you this, that I got a job as the restricted earnings coach at the University of Wisconsin. That opened the door for me, and Stan was going to be the top assistant for Stu Jackson. And Stu Jackson's the name here, Stan, that everybody knows because he was with the Big East for many years, right? Recently before he left. And then, I was with other coaches as well, Ray McCallum, Brian Hecker, who's still with the Miami Heat. But we all came together at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. But Stan picked me up at the airport, and I think that on his end, he was probably like, I know this guy is a player, but I just hope he doesn't come in here as a coach and still want to be a player. Because those are the worst guys. I mean, I've actually had guys I've worked with, hired, et cetera, where being a player, good player or whatever, doesn't mean you're going to be a good coach. Sometimes it actually is a curse because what made you a good player will not make you a good coach. You have to think differently to some degree. And Stan, to his credit, he shaped me right away. And me and him, like we went all day, every day. We lived at a Howard Johnson's damn near together. We ate lunch every day together at a place called Babe's, which is probably still there, a lunch spot in Madison, Wisconsin. And all we had is work. Our families weren't there. And it was just like, and he probably would admit this, I wasn't signing up to be a former player who's now a coach. I wanted to be a good coach. I did. I understood the difference, and he helped me understand the difference. And when I say we put some time in, we went all day, every day for like 4 straight months where, I don't know the hours we went, but it was somewhere between 12 to 18 a day. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that's one of the great memories of my coaching career too. Those 2 months before, Amy and Kim got there, and, it was just all basketball all day. I mean, we had a lot of laughs too. It wasn't just, it wasn't like we were just grinding it out. We had some really fun times, but it was all basketball all the time. And, probably as much as any time in my life, that's where, I had concentrated basketball time. And it was probably similar to you, but, having grown up, I was around my dad and my brother, and it was just, we loved those times because it was all basketball, and you had people who shared your passion for the game and for coaching. And you and I shared that because you came from the same background, and we shared that passion. And shoot, I wasn't all that much more experienced than you, and we were just, going after it, trying to learn and get better and develop a program and everything else. And I think the other thing is, and this would go also for any profession, and this is what I think sports at its essence are really all about, is I think that when you work with people toward a goal, and you're both or all, whatever, busting your ass toward a goal, you form a bond and a closeness that is different than a friendship. So I've made friends everywhere along the way, but I've got bonds with a few people. And you and I, since that time, we don't see each other all that much, occasionally, talk a few times a year, but I always will feel close to you and bonded. And it's because of that year, but because of those 2 months and knowing that I was working with somebody who cared every bit as much as I did and worked every bit as hard as I did and wanted to learn and improve and everything else. I mean, that's just, I wish more people understood the essence of what it's all about. You have a lot of people who are trying to climb over other people and backstab other people and climb the ladder, and that's great. And then they get there and they got nobody to share it with. There's nobody pulling for them. They got nobody, I've had players that have made all-star teams, and when it gets announced, like, they come in the locker room and nobody's like that thrilled for them because they were like that selfish guy. And then there's other guys where everybody's jacked because they know the guy deserved it. I wish more kids and even coaches really understood what it's all about when you give yourself to the work, when you give yourself to the game and when you give yourself to the team.
Stop renting your power, own it. TGE Solar makes it easy to purchase solar panels for your home or business so you can take control of your monthly electricity bill and start saving today. They'll help you find the best solar system to meet your needs, and their expert in-house installation team makes the process seamless. They're proud to be based in Cincinnati, family owned and operated by a Xavier alum. Mention this podcast and save $1,000. Visit TGEsolar.com to request your free energy evaluation today.
What makes us human? Humanity is found in the actions that redefine care. Actions that we at TriHealth take every day. By seeing those who feel invisible, hearing needs that have been ignored. TriHealth is healing the body and the human spirit, so all can know and live a better life.
Okay, so the rules, the NCAA rules then were you could live scout. So Stan did a lion's share of the scouting that year. You got to remember we're in Madison, Wisconsin. It starts to get cold, November, December, real cold after Christmas at a high level. There's snow, there's a lot of different things. So live scout means you can get in your car and drive, or you try to catch a plane and you're going to go watch the other team you're getting ready to play live and in person on the sideline. And then, that was before a lot of this technology as well. So without the technology, you were blind with a lot of things to prepare for a game unless you actually physically were on the sidelines and saw it yourself. Keeping in mind that not every game was even on TV back then. So Stan had the assignment of scouting Marquette. Marquette was a rival. Marquette, Wisconsin, still a huge game now. And we played them early in the year. So let's say the game was in December. So he would have all these different, assignments. How many times can we see Marquette against an exhibition team or some of their non-conference games before we play them? So a couple times me and him drove. I can remember going to Green Bay. We left Madison and freezing cold. This is one of those, you leave practice, you're just trying to eat on the run. We drive all the way up, drive all the way back, get home at 2 a.m. And then the next day begins. And it wasn't like you said, hey, can I come in late the next day? No, just the next day. Now, one of these assignments I drew by myself. He was busy, and it was Marquette playing against, I think it was, let's call it the Russian national team. Do you remember what national? Okay, Russian national team, and Kevin O'Neill would have been the coach of Marquette. And Stan said, hey, look, right after practice, hustle up to Milwaukee, couple-hour drive, scout Marquette versus the Russian national team. Here's a couple of my notes. We've been at this. You could really help. I can't make it. I got to do something else. It was just like you could have. There's nothing in the world that I wanted to do more. Perfect. I got my car that I brought with me from Pittsburgh and just put my head down and boom, there I am. I'm in Milwaukee. I go in and watch Marquette play the Russian national team. And again, no cell phone, so it's not like you can text or call while you're at the game. I'm watching, and I'm like, I can't wait to talk to Stan about this. The team, the Russian national team ends up losing by. I'm sorry, I have it mixed up here, right, Stan? So I'm killing two birds with one stone. One, I'm watching Marquette, and two, I'm watching this Russian national team because 5 days later, at Wisconsin, we're going to play the Russian national team, right? So I got both assignments. Watch Marquette, you get a free look at them. I can't go. And by the way, we're playing this Russian team 5 days from now. So you got to get some scouting notes for us on them as well. They're both equally important. That was my assignment, okay? And I'm by myself. So I was like, I can't wait to get back twofold. I got some good stuff on Marquette, couple calls, couple things I wouldn't have had if I didn't get here. I know Marquette better. I'm going to tell Stan what I've seen. But more importantly, this Russian national team stinks. Like, we're a new staff. We never coached a game at Wisconsin. I think it might have been our first ever game, right? 0-0. And I said, they just lost by what looked like, it'd be like us playing at UConn last year. The game was over in 8 minutes. We lost by, Marquette beat them by 50 points. right? The Russian national team lost by 50 points. They're terrible. So sure enough, I get back next morning, walk in, Stu Jackson's around, but I go to Stan and said, Stan, here's what I got on Marquette. It was great that I went up there. Boom, 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 boom. But more importantly, this Russian team stinks. He goes, yeah, I saw the game. They lost by 40. I said, I'm telling you, if we don't beat them, we're not going to win the game. And I think Stan might have even said, well, I hope you're right, but just be careful saying that one. Who knows, blah, blah, blah. So, me, young, I don't know any better. We get together a couple hours later. Stu goes, hey, tell me about this Russian national team. I said, Stu, I said it just like this, I think, Stan. Marquette's pretty good. We've got some good stuff on them. But the Russian national team, if we don't beat the Russian national team, we're going to be 0-18 in the Big Ten. They stink. They're terrible. They lost by 40. They didn't even try. 5 days later, we play the Russian national team. They beat us. They beat us. And I know Stan was like, first of all, nobody felt good. We were all in this together. But Stan knew I was about ready to get an ass chewing, and I deserved it. Stu Jackson looked at me and said, 0-18, huh? 0-18, stink, huh? They're terrible. Yeah, a lot of good. He said anything he said, he was right to say because I got over my skis with it. Yeah, but that was lesson number one.
But I will say this. This is Sean Miller at his best. So Stu Jackson's pissed, like going after him about saying that. And Stu walks out of the coach's locker room, and Sean looks at me and he goes, I don't know, man. They still stink. He was not going to give in on that. He was not going to give in. He was just like, no, they tell me what you want. They stink.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we had some good moments, but it was. But I will say this: I want to get one serious thing. I want to make sure I get this on the podcast, and I've said this to numerous people over the years. Like I've had the privilege of being around a lot of great coaches over my career at every level, and I've been with two guys that right from the beginning, like you knew they were going to be great coaches because of the way players responded to them. Sean Miller and Eric Spoelstra, like young guys, first time, like Sean's right out of college, going out and working with guys, doing individual work, taking charge of teams in practice and stuff. And the respect he had from guys right away, like you could tell. And Eric Spoelstra was the same in Miami. He was in the video room, but he assisted in practice. And guys would listen to him right away. Those are the two guys that I didn't have to be around more than a week. And you knew, like, okay, these guys are going to go on to good things. And Sean may not remember this, but Sean was an assistant at NC State. So what would that have been, like your third year in coaching? You did a year at Wisconsin, a year at Miami of Ohio, or two?
Probably about 5 years in, 4 or 5 years in, yeah.
So a guy who had been my athletic director when I was a Division II coach was the AD at Towson State in Maryland. And he called me and he said, just calling for some advice. I said, look, I don't even know if you could get him. He's really young. Go hire Sean Miller. Mm-hmm. And, he was like, he gets back to me that just the resume's not long enough, the whole thing. And I remember his name was Wayne Edwards, great guy. And Sean goes on in coaching and we're down the road a few years. And I get a call. I haven't talked to Wayne in years. And I get a call and he goes, I should have listened to you. I didn't even know what he was talking about. I hope I'd pick up the phone. He said, I should have listened to you. And I said, well, what are you talking about? He had just watched your team at Xavier win a game in the Sweet 16 to go to the 8. And I was like, I told you, I said I was with the guy. And Sean would probably agree with this. Like, you have coaches that you look at from the outside and you respect and everything, but you really only know.
That's for sure.
You really only know if you've seen the guy on the court every day. Like if you've seen them, then you know, because you've seen them teach, you've seen their energy level, their work ethic, you've seen how players respond. And so, and I felt the same thing with Eric. And, it's like, and I was right both times. The one thing, I won't give myself a lot of credit for anything in coaching other than I know good coaches. I really do. Like that I have confidence in, like, especially with guys I've worked with. Like if I tell you a guy can coach, he can coach. Like, and I know what I'm talking about. And I identified you and Eric like right off the bat. So I'm proud of that, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And the impact that you've had on me is immense, and some of it is that developmental part that we talked about of whoever you're around initially, they're going to have a huge impact on how you think, what you think, how you do things, what you look at as your priorities, and especially in building a program. And that 1 year at Wisconsin, man, it was, those are the stories that we could tell. We could keep going on.
We could have a comedy podcast too, like, like it was great. But I'll tell you the other thing there, and it's really been in every job I've ever had. I don't think people realize, they always think about it in terms of players learning from coaches, but I've learned from every coach I've worked with. Coaches learn from coaches, but coaches learn from players too.
You're right.
Like, I've had players teach me a lot of stuff. Michael Finley at Wisconsin was one of them. Guys at the lower level, nobody would really know. I learned more about pick and roll basketball from Tim Hardaway than from any coach I've been around. Like when we got Tim in Miami, like him telling me what he was looking at and everything else. And so I think that, and you, I know, are like this because I've been around you. If you're a learner, like you're not worried about rank or anything else. It's, you can learn from everybody around you if you'll pay attention and listen, and you see players making plays and you're like, ooh, and then you got to ask, like, what are you seeing right there? And then you can incorporate that with the next guy that you come with and everything else. I could give you a list of probably 100 things that I ended up as part of my teaching and coaching that I directly got from players.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right.
And I'll tell you what, I'll give you one on persistence and work ethic. We used to do those individual workouts at Miami, and I found out what an elite work ethic and will was from Michael Finley, because I had him in the gym one day and we ended up with this drill at the end. So he was shooting threes, and Mike at the time, he had that flat shot at the time. He was a good shooter, not a great shooter, became a great shooter in the NBA. But at the time it was flat, but we would have him going around. They're just moving around the arc. I'm rebounding. And it was +1 for every one you made and -1 for every one you missed. And it was the last drill of the workout. So he'd done some hard work and he had to get to +50. And so, we had built up from like +25 early in the year. And I remember one day, and he would get to like 40 and then he'd miss 5 in a row and he'd be back to 35. And we're going, and he's been out there now forever. Like, I'm like, oh my God. And then he's got to leave for class and stuff. I'm like, Mike, man, we'll pick this up after practice. And he's like, no, I'm not leaving till I'm +50. And it was probably, I'm telling you, it was a rough day for him. It was probably another half hour. That dude was not going to leave until he was +50. Yeah. Legitimately +50. And I'm like, I've been around good workers and good players, and I'm going to still say 95% of them would have said, yeah, we'll come back to this later. I didn't get it today. Right. My man was not leaving. And that's when I knew, like we already knew, what kind of kid he was character-wise and his talent. That's when I knew, like, this dude's something special. Like, I gave him the out. I gave it to him. Like, you can go now.
Yeah.
ain't going. I'm like, okay, this dude's different, man. This is a different breed right here. And obviously became an NBA All-Star and great career. And now he's an assistant general manager with the Mavericks. I mean, I'll never forget that drill. And I learned that. I've used that story with players before, like when guys are like, oh, how long we going with this? And I'll say, well, I'll tell you what, when I was at the University of Wisconsin, I'll tell that story, it's just different guys, different breed.
What I remember the most about Michael Finley is, again, that year I was the restricted earnings coach, and I was in charge of our basically skill development in terms of working guys out. The rules were so different then. The staffs were much shorter. You guys didn't have all the time that we would have today as an assistant coach to even get in the gym with your players. So once the year began, that had to fall on someone who couldn't go off campus and recruit, and that was me. But we would schedule, player development workouts, and we did it pretty much the whole year. If you remember, Stan, January and February, and I'm coming from Pittsburgh, and it doesn't get any grayer or colder than it does in Pittsburgh until you live in Madison, Wisconsin. And I'm here to tell you, like 7 a.m. on February 8th, that's some really cold weather. I mean, a different level cold. And I would have these player development workouts sometimes before class, 8 a.m. or 8:30 or 9 a.m. for 40 minutes or 30 minutes. And I remember watching Michael Finley come in from the outdoors stand. I mean, he had what it looked like 4 coats on. You couldn't see his face. It was dark outside. He would walk in. And then if you're the coach in charge of that workout, I mean, you had to inspire, but it was like, okay, Mike, look, we're going to be fine. Let's go. Come on. Let's get this left hand better. But you're right. He would take off those coats. He'd take them a couple minutes. And next thing you know, man, he was working. He could run all day as well.
All day.
Another part, like
Stu and I were talking about that a year ago. I ran into Stu, believe it or not, going to a Georgetown game at Texas Tech. So we're headed to Lubbock, Texas. If it's not the end of the earth, it should be. And but we ended up spending a day together, and we were just talking about that. If you ever ran practice till when Michael Finley was tired, everyone else would have been dead.
No doubt. Motor, dead. Unbelievable motor. Unbelievable.
Incredible. He carried that over to the NBA, and it's just, you mentioned the motor with TJ McConnell, and man, I mean, there aren't that many guys who have that kind of motor. And if you do, they're special. I mean, we're all out there looking for shooters and ball handlers and passers, but man, find those guys with a motor. First of all, they'll put in the work and become better with the skill areas. It's hard to find guys with a motor like that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well,
Stan, we've been going for over an hour here, and I will say you have an open invitation to come back to Xavier at some point, because I think we could just keep on going for another 3 or 4 hours. I think we just scratched the surface in stories here.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Like Sean said, we could do easily an hour just on stories from that 1 year, but it's Sean's been one of the most impactful people in my career. I mean, those 2 months were just, as much as I missed my wife, I don't remember ever having in my career a 2-month period like that where you could just pour yourself into basketball all the time, and the other person was into it just as much. And it was such a unique situation, because we were literally living in the same place, in the office all day, all the time. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, and like a lot of it, you look back, it was funny, because our offices were they're in the football stadium, and it went Stu's office, the head coach's office, and you go outside, you're on the concourse. Then it was the concession stand, and then my office, and then Sean's office. I mean, literally the concession stand
smelled like nacho cheese. Yeah. No,
it was different, man. But it was pure basketball. Forget all fancy stuff and all the great things that the big time programs have now. It was just basketball. Can we find some players and can we get them to play better and can we win some games? That's all it was. And Sean and I, trying to do our jobs and get better ourselves. I mean, Exon and Owen and, sitting and talking. I mean, it was fantastic. It meant a lot to me. And, I'll always be a Sean Miller fan. I got one last thing. I know, Paul, we've been here a long time.
But you can go as long as you want. You can go as long as you want.
I want to give you just an idea, though, of the impact that Sean made. And he was only there a year. But so years later, Sean's there 1 year, restricted earnings coach. And years later, your first stint at Xavier, you guys are playing in Miami.
That's right.
In our arena down there. So I bring my family to the game. Okay. Donna Shalala, big time person. Donna Shalala had been the president at the University of Wisconsin when we were at Wisconsin. And she had become the president at the University of Miami. And so Donna was there at the game because there were two games that night. Did you play Miami that night?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, you played Miami and there was another game. So I'm sitting in the end zone and Miami's playing Xavier. And Donna Shalala, who I maybe talked to once a year, it's not like we were close friends. Donna Shalala comes walking around and sits down next to me and says, Stan, is that Sean Miller that we had at Wisconsin? And I'm thinking holy crap. This is the president of two major universities who then served in the Obama White House in the cabinet for 8 years. She'd been around Sean. Sean was at Wisconsin for probably 10 months. But the impact he made, this is not a basketball person. Donna, she was a sports fan, but she remembered the restricted earnings coach from Wisconsin. That says a lot about Donna Shalala, but she's not going to remember everybody like that. I'll never forget her coming around, and it was wow, this is different now. This isn't what we're used to here. So Sean had made immediate impacts on a lot of people in that very first year at Wisconsin, and his success at Xavier in Arizona has not been a surprise to any of us who were around him then, that's for sure.
Thank you, Stan. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, Stan, we appreciate you coming on and spending over an hour with us today. I feel like coaches across the country are going to love this episode. People really enjoy hearing these stories. So thank you. I'm really happy that we finally found a time to make this work. This was a great show.
That's great. And if you hear from him, another big shout out to Brian Grant, who obviously is going through a lot of challenges, and James Posey, two great Xavier Musketeers.
Yeah, no, those guys. And you're right. This is a place, Stan, from that perspective. It's interesting that the topic that we came up with, self-awareness, being unselfish and knowing who you are, being a great teammate, that you have two guys right there, James Posey and Brian Grant, that you could almost put as the definition of doing it right, of how they did that as an NBA player and what made them great. I think it's a compliment to this place too, because if you think about both of those guys, James Posey played for Skip Prosser, who we both knew really well. And then obviously Brian Grant played for Pete Gillen, and, two different coaches. But I think that's one of the reasons that this place is so special, because those are guys. I mean, Brian Grant's from Georgetown, Ohio. I don't even know if he had another Division I offer before he came to Xavier. James Posey's from Cleveland, wasn't as highly recruited, sat out his first year at Xavier and became who he became. But, that's when a place is a special place.
Well, David West, who I don't have as fond of memories of because he kicked my ass instead of helping me. But, those guys are, when you have a kind of program that is taking guys who were not, the top of the line recruits and they're turning into, big time productive NBA players and having great careers. I mean, that speaks volumes about the place, and doing it, quite honestly, at a place that, isn't going to just sell out to do anything they can for basketball. I mean, they're still going to maintain their values and ethics and things like that. You've got to do it the right way, and you got to educate kids. And most of the people, every program in the country, I don't care where you go, are going to have to get out and do other things for a living. And I think Xavier understands that as much as anybody, and they want to win as much as anybody. I know you do, but they're going to do it the right way, and people are going to have lives that are going to be productive when they're done playing the game.
Well, Stan, we appreciate you joining the show today. Thanks so much. I'm sure that you'll be a reoccurring guest that we'll have you back on some point.
Good. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining the show today. Thanks to everybody for watching. Thank you to our sponsor, Deer Park Roofing and Payroll Partners. We'll see you next time on the Sean Miller Podcast.
This has been the Sean Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing, with your hosts, Paul Fritchner and Adam Baum. Join us again soon for another episode with the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Sean Miller.